I'm going to talk today about competitive advantage. And Jocelyn's challenge to me, since 99U and this pop-up school is an experiment in itself, really, right now, was, Scott, experiment with some new content. Think about something new like career development and what this means for you, for the team, for companies, for products and services, the stuff that people are working on who are going to come. And when I started to think about that, and I started to think about how do we find what each of us is really good at compared to the market that we're in. Market that we're in as a freelancer designer, market that we're in as a company building a product or an app or whatever else. And so I was thinking about this for a while, and the image that really came to mind was that image at the end of The Matrix. And anyone not seen The Matrix? Oh, a couple of people. Well, here, so you have to see it, first of all. And second of all, Neo, the main character of The Matrix, the whole movie is being riddled by bullets, chopped in half, always being attacked by these Mr. Andersons, this like agent in The Matrix. And he just, you wonder the whole movie, like, how does this guy stand a chance? And then somehow, right at the end, he has that moment where he suddenly sees this truth. Everything just, it's sort of like a step function and change of who he is and his strategy. And everything just becomes this code. And all the bullets that are flying against him, he's not running anymore, he's not hiding, he's not fighting. He just like flicks them away, as they're in the air. And it's just this whole new mode. And I think that that is what it feels like to know, what you're best at and what you're going to focus on. And at that point in time, you actually stop worrying about the competitors and stop chasing them and emulating them. You start to tune into something extremely unique that distinguishes your approach in your career or in your business and your market. And that's what I wanted to talk about and figure out with you and share some new ideas around this. Because I think that's what we're all trying to find. And by the way, when you find it, you then need to shift it. Because as soon as you have it and it's working for you, everyone else will start to emulate that. The market will shift towards you, and you'll have to recalibrate. And so we need to talk about that as well. So what distinguishes you and your service, among others? That is your competitive advantage, as I would frame it. And the problem, and why is this so important, by the way, right? We have limited amount of resources. We can only prioritize so many things every day. We can only get so many things right. And actually, frankly, we can only get a few things really right. The problem, of course, is that when you focus on everything, you're really not going to be focused on anything. And you're not going to succeed, particularly in any specific thing that will distinguish you against this market that is happening around us. And especially when we're successful, starts to follow what we're doing. So we have to think about it this way. So I wanted to jump in first to finding competitive advantage from the mindset of a company or a business or a product, but also an individual, and have you think about that a little bit for you. And then I want to just quickly talk about, okay, you found it. How do you make sure you're tapping it in the right way? How do you make sure you're set up to succeed? And then I want to talk about quickly shifting it, because inevitably, once you have it, if you stick with it too long, you will really fall behind. And we want to make sure we don't have that happen either. So to start, I think the question is, first point, what do you want to be best at? And that's kind of the obvious, logical one, and we're always thinking about that. But we seldom think about the question of, what are you willing to be bad at? And actually, some of the greatest cases throughout the history of product and service and even people, think about both of these things really consciously and then invest or don't invest according to the answers. And here's how I would propose we think about this from like a framework is, think about the distinguishing attributes and services of you or your product or your team in the market around you. And that's kind of this x-axis. And then on the y-axis here you have, what do you purposely want to be good at, really good at, exceptionally good at, and what do you actually kind of want to be bad at? And here, knowing that we have to make trade-offs, right? And we have to distinguish ourselves amongst others that are doing similar things, and in the businesses we're in, and the services that we render to clients, et cetera. So what does this mean? Well, let's do some examples to try to make this a bit more clear. And I picked some some classic examples. Like one is Southwest Airlines, which is an airline that started up in a very heated competitive industry, and it took a very interesting tack that we'll explore for a moment. We'll talk about Apple, because we always talk about Apple. Everyone always talks about Apple. take an individual like Stefan Sagmeister, this legendary designer, has a unique way that he's built himself and his business and his brand. And then, of course, we want to talk a little bit about you as well. So let's jump in here. And let's talk about the airline industry, right? So the airline industry, we've all been on a plane before. And think about the things that the airline industry traditionally has always been extremely focused on. There are things like service, the friendly skies, the smile when you board the plane, the phone, the people that pick up the phone. You have price, like how good is the price? Now, the airline industry traditionally has targeted demographic that can afford to fly, and so oftentimes, prices are really high. Food, let's have the best food and make people choose our airline over others. Let's give people drinks in the sky. Let's give people blue chips and great nuts and whatever it is. Routes. I want to make sure that when people fly our airline that they can take from anywhere to anywhere. We want to have a global airline. You can always rely on us. We're the first brand that comes to mind, right? That's routes. And then safety, of course. Even though we think that we're always scared that planes are dangerous, and in fact probably New York City taxi is more dangerous than a plane, but nevertheless we have this consumer mentality of safety is super, super important, and you would never want to get on a plane if I told you that safety wasn't their most important thing, right? Safety has to be important. So let's think about the airline industry, generally speaking, from what do they want to be good at and what are they willing to be bad at? So airline industry wants to be decent at service, not too great, because again, what other options do we have? There are only a few airlines. So I think that service is good, but maybe not as great as, say, Zappos when you're buying shoes and stuff like that. Price. I think that traditionally the airline industry has increased prices, right, as we get closer to the date of travel and oftentimes perhaps even fixes prices for certain routes. Food. I know a lot of airlines have always tried to innovate or optimize how can they get good foods on planes and how can we have a good experience, ambiance on the plane. Routes is something that every airline's always really tried to optimize. Let's have as many, especially the traditional airlines like United and Delta and American, let's have as many routes as possible for people to choose from and really provide that service. And then safety, of course, every airline says is their #1 priority. So here is the airline industry. And then you had Southwest Airlines come along at a time, starting an airline when there really was a lot of trouble in the airline industry. Margins were decreasing, the price of oil was increasing, people were paying more. And what they did is they did something very different. They said, okay, this is the airline industry, so let's have service be more important. Let's really train people on service. On price, let's really compete on price. Let's have lower prices than everyone else, but let's not care at all about food. Let's basically tell people, bring your own food, don't count on us, you're not going to have good food at all. Let's not invest in that area at all, and let's not market ourselves in that area at all. On routes, let's have very few. Let's really only focus on a certain region of the United States and really have no other variants around that. So if you're traveling in that area, we can give you the best price and the best service, but if you're traveling beyond that area, we're not for you. And then of course, safety, they have to be on par with the rest of the airline industry. And so you can see here that this airline basically said, we're in some ways choosing complete opposite values in terms of how we want to invest in our business and communicate to our customers and really build our brand. And this really distinguished them in the airline industry and ended up becoming a great success story. Let's think about Apple. Really quickly, I want to do a couple more examples. So the computer industry, just general computer industry, has always really tried to have a tremendous amount of variety in the types of different setups that, this much memory, this type of monitor, this type of whatever, a lot of variety. Always has tried to compete on price. Dell and all these other HP, Compaq, were always competing on price, trying to have a lower and lower and lower price for the same thing. Design, obviously, as we know, was never really important in the computer industry back then. When in the earlier days, like maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, speed. Well, speed was important. People wanted to have, and computers were always competing on what was faster and what was faster. And distribution, no-brainer. Let's have distribution, be easy. Let's have people be able to buy computers wherever they are, wherever they want to buy a computer. So then you had Apple come around and said, okay, we think about this differently. We're going to have very, very little variety. In fact, we're going to start killing this, the setups that don't perform very well. We're going to have bad prices, meaning that we're going to charge a lot for our computers. We're going to be extremely high on design, right? On speed, I think they also were saying we want to even compete more on speed. We want to be known as having the fastest computer in the world. All those ads that were like, this is the fastest computer in the world. And distribution, they were willing to be bad at. They were willing to say, hey, we're not going to sign with Circuit City and with all these other places. We're going to really try to more control who's selling, who's an authorized reseller, especially about 10 or 15 years ago. That was a real channel and really the only channel for them. And so again, you can see here, very opposite kind of strategy. And we'll talk about in a few minutes the fact that, again, this might have to change, right? Even especially now as Apple proliferates the market with their new products, they're starting to have to rethink some of these decisions. And that's where you kind of have to shift your competitive advantage. The last example I want to give before I want to have you think about yours is Stefan Sagmeister, an individual designer. Now think about the design industry and the types of services we want to provide to our clients. What we want to have is a studio size that can control and manage a lot of stuff. And you want to have people that are specialized in every sort of thing. On price, we want to have better prices because oftentimes our clients are going and getting, putting an RFP out there and getting a bunch of different bids. We want to compete on price. Talent is important, obviously, but sometimes we want to hire a lot of junior, maybe less experienced people to do some of the production work because that's how we kind of make sure that it's a business and make sure that we can meet demand when we need to. In terms of the story of our firm, and oftentimes when it's the process of being hired, we're more focused on some of these other things like price and studio size and also availability. Like we're always there when you need something from us. And that's how you can rely on us as a design firm for your needs. So you can think about the industry of design, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but this is just a framework to then compare it with someone like Stefan Sagmeister who says, hey, it's just me or it's just me and one partner. I'm going to obviously have much higher prices. Now, you could argue he could because there was demand, but again, there was a choice, right, of do I want to blow up this, this demand for my services and get a larger studio and start to, have price in line more, or do I want to distinguish myself in this way? Talent, I want to be known for this very specific things that I do, and I won't even do anything for clients that doesn't really showcase my talent in a way that I think it's best. I'm really protecting the reputation of how talented I am. Story, is really important to Stefan. He's always talking about the story behind what he does and opening up and doing a lot of side projects to help share that. And then availability, very low. A lot of folks, a lot of great brands have wanted to work with him. He just doesn't have the availability. So you can just see, again, a differentiation. And of course, there's some things that you have to have in order to make some of these trade-offs. But you can see how, again, someone is probably thinking about this sort of thing. So now, I want to ask you. And I think we have someone in the audience with some paper and pens for those who need it. But if you have a notebook or a sketch pad or anything, think about it for, we'll take 90 seconds here or 2 minutes. Think about it for yourself. What are the distinguishing attributes or services, the features, essentially, of you or the product or service that you think will distinguish you in the market? Is it price? Is it design? Is it some unique thing for the market that you're in, like routes for the airline industry, right? What are those three, 4, 5 things? And then once you have those, I would just draw those quickly on a straight line. And then think about just the general market, what their approach to that is typically, and think about what your approach is to each of those things specifically. And the outcome of this is hopefully for you to see that if your lines match the industry lines, then you have not found your competitive advantage. But if there are some polar opposites between you and the market around you, then you have. And continue to think about this for yourself and for the product you're trying to build, the service you're trying to provide for clients, the team you're trying to put in place. The insights you get out of this help you determine the types of people you want to hire, the things you want to communicate when you're marketing, when you're talking to a potential client or customer, or you're building that splash page for the product you're trying to release to the world. These are the things that you talk about. And you purposely don't talk about those other things. that you're not trying to distinguish yourself by. In fact, in some cases, you choose to be bad at some of those things in order to allocate resources and focus on the things you want to be great at. So this is about finding our competitive advantage. Now, I want to move on and just make the case that you have to make sure that whatever those things are fall in the overlap of these three things. The skills that you have or could easily possess, the genuine interests that you have. So if one of your points is logistics, and you're going to handle some aspect of the logistics for the service or product you're providing, and that's your distinguishing piece. But if you can't stand logistics, don't make that your point. And then the opportunity that presents itself. Right? So if I love music and I have this genuine interest in music and all I think about is music, and I happen to live in New Orleans, which is music at my doorstep and all these bands around, but if I can't carry a note for the life of me, I lack the skills, then I shouldn't be trying to join a band. But if I'm a business manager, right, if I have a business mind and I love music and I live in New Orleans, then I am living in that intersection. So you just have to think about whatever it is that you want to do to play that role that distinguishes yourself, and what you have in mind. Make sure that you're playing in that space, that overlap of those three things. All right, so we've talked about finding or honing in on a competitive advantage. We've talked about making sure that we're operating within a zone that we're poised to succeed, set up to succeed. But now let's talk about shifting it. So let's assume you're successful. Well, success becomes extremely dangerous when you're fooled into thinking that you know what you're doing, and when you're fooled into thinking that you know what's next. Because, of course, when you're successful, the market starts to shift towards you. And I think that it's fair to say that self-awareness as an individual, but also as a business and a product, is probably the only sustainable competitive advantage you can find. Because it's the only way you can keep shifting what those things are that you want to be good at and bad at over time. And so here, just think about a company in flux, right? Think about Apple. We talked about how they were distinguishing themselves as a business versus the whole computer industry. And now think about things that have changed recently, like here just showing how Apple has to shift. Well, they came out with this one iPhone in one color, but now more people have them, and there are more competitors and more options, and now they're coming out with all of these different colors. So they're actually increasing variety. They're somewhat decreasing price. They're starting to realize that they've saturated the market of people who are willing to pay a certain amount, and now they have to kind of go and target a different market. Design, I think, is still a real value for Apple. Speed, perhaps they're starting to say, hey, we can sell a phone for a little less and have like a less powerful chip than the best one on the line, just to make sure that we're competing in the market. And also you can see that the industry is kind of targeting, I should also probably put the computer industry kind of one a little bit more towards design now, because in some ways the market has kind of now come a little bit closer to Apple on the design side of things. Even when you see the latest Dell computers and stuff, it's nothing like you saw in the early days. And so what does Apple have to think about, right? Apple has to think about, oh my goodness, are we gradually going to just look like the computer industry? Is it all going to kind of merge, and we're just going to be a player? Or are we going to start to really double down on some things that people aren't focused on? That's the kind of thing you have to think about. So again and again, you're asking yourself, what do you want to be really good at? What do you want to be the best at? And what are you willing to be bad at? The utility of feedback, obviously, is extremely important over the course of a career. And I really think that as you become more accustomed to what you do and more successful in something, you do become blind to your shortcomings. And I think that even 99U doing the pop-up school is an example of, well, this conference works, this format works, let's do it every year. Oh, wait, there needs to be some more interactive stuff. People want to have more customized experiences. They want to dig deeper into the skills they want to develop. What do we do to switch it up a little bit? And I know that was something that Jocelyn was thinking about and leading with her team. So we need to recognize that feedback is probably the best form of compensation, not only from our colleagues, but also from our customers. When you get this stuff, it really is invaluable to knowing how we have to shift. One way I would just quickly suggest you make sure you get the feedback you need is to ask this question. And I don't think it has to be these crazy forms and processes and all this other stuff. But if you just ask the people that you work with, your colleagues, your clients, on a consistent basis, what should I start, stop, and continue doing? Could you just give me 2 or 3 things, right, that I should start, stop, and continue doing? And if I got that from 10 people that I work with, some of them will be one-offs that I'll probably ignore, but there will be themes that people will say over and over again about what I should start, stop, and continue doing that will really dictate the changes that I need to make and how I operate. And from a customer standpoint, the changes I need to make sure that I stay ahead of where the market is. So I'd end with just the reminder that the knowledge of what we do wrong is gold. And as you start to recognize what you need to start, stop, and continue doing, as you start to shift your competitive advantage, it kind of goes back to the top again, right? You're trying to distinguish yourself in the market of what you're trying to do in the world to make sure you're noticed and given the opportunity to succeed. So hopefully that's helpful. And thanks again for being here today.